is there testing that you're doing or people in your field doing that others are trying to ban?
Oh, yeah. Well, absolutely. Look, the research we do, so think how serious the situation is, that I have got I can say this because it has been published, it's in print, but the main figures in plant physiology, and now I'm talking about the editor-in-chief of the journal Plant Physiology, the editor of the textbook Plant Physiology, the textbook like any undergrad student goes through in biology courses. So the big popes in the field, they published a paper in this journal a few years ago explicitly asking funding agencies to stop funding our research.
Wow.
And academic journals to stop publishing our papers. They were asking them to do that, to say, hey, don't give these guys money because they are, they were explaining why we shouldn't be funded. You know what they were saying? They were saying because they are wasting or ruining, I'm paraphrasing, the frame of mind of a generation of researchers, young researchers. So they don't want young researchers to be exposed to heterodox hypotheses.
So what's the real fear?
I don't get it.
Welcome to another installment of Behind Greatness by Inspire. Luciano here speaking. We're joined by another special guest across the pond, as we say here, in Spain. His name is Paco Calvo, and Paco is a professor of the philosophy of science and principal investigator of MINT Lab, which is a minimal intelligence lab at the University of Murcia in Spain. He specializes in the philosophy of cognitive science, courtesy of a Fulbright scholarship in the late 90s in California, San Diego, received a PhD in philosophy from the University of Glasgow. And 25 years ago, time flies. Yeah, no kidding. His current research interests range broadly. We're not going to list them all here, but all within the cognitive sciences with special emphasis on plant intelligence, ecological psychology, and embodied cognitive science. As per his research at the MINT Lab, he studies the ecological basis of plant intelligence by conducting experimental studies at the intersection of the areas of plant neurobiology and ecological psychology. He's supported by the Vikan Rasmussen Foundation in Europe to investigate the behavioral evidence of plant consciousness. You can also check out his latest book called Planta Sapiens that was published in 2022, 23.
23, yeah. In the
23.
States, in the US, 23 with Norton, yeah.
Well, welcome to the show, Paco.
Well, thanks, Luciano. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So it's a pleasure for me. Listen to you speak. Well, probably 5 months ago, maybe even 6 months ago. So, well, this is interesting. I've never heard this before. So let's get started here with a quick question. What is a philosopher of cognitive science?
Well, that's a good question to start with. Yeah. What is it that you do, right? What do you guys do?
Yeah. Let's start.
Yeah. Well, look. I mean, just think about the cognitive sciences, right? Mm-hmm. So in cognitive science, you study the mind, or mentality, or consciousness, or intelligence, you name it, right? Or cognitive capacities, learning, memorizing, decision-making, problem-solving, whatever, right? The type of things you study in a psychology department or a cognitive science department, right? Now, when we do the philosophy of cognitive science, I like to tell my students, philosophy of science students, like if you play the piano or the drums, right, in the backstage, and you can do the philosophy or drum playing or the philosophy of piano playing, right? So when we do the philosophy of, we are doing something different from the actual piano playing or the actual cognitive science. So I like to say that philosophers walk into the lab with those dressing the cloak, right? What do you call in English the white
coat? The lab coat.
The coat, right?
Yeah.
So we in a sense we have to walk into the lab with them, despite not doing the actual science, in a sense, right? To make sure that they don't fall prey of all sorts of biases and preconceptions and prejudices, and that they keep in their mind the theoretical framework that they need to be paying attention to. Otherwise, it's just data collection, right? It's not science. It's not about collecting data. We need to be doing something else. And the philosophers of cognitive science try to make sure that the way we study cognition in humans, animals, or plants is done in the right sort of way. And for that, you need to do a lot of theoretical work beyond simply data gathering.
It reminds me of something that one of our past guests, Vera Teisler, in Mexico. She's an archaeologist amongst many things, but she's a specialist there, one of the world's specialists on in her field. And she said a scientist without curiosity is just a technician.
Absolutely. Right. And in my case, it's even worse because think that the lab we funded is funded in a philosophy department, not just because we are curious in a peculiar sense, that we are especially curious about the minds of plants, right? But because the questions we are raising as philosophers of cognitive science are not questions that are being raised in biology departments or in psychology departments. And that's the real asset.
So, yeah, the real asset is making the questions,
Absolutely.
So I wrote something down the first time we spoke. Very, very cool because with Ia Whiteley, who's she's a space psychologist, and we talked about explaining away. And then you just brought it up in a conversation. Allow me to read this. So you said humans have a small time scale. These are my notes. So please, there's going to be some cracks here. But essentially, you said humans have a small time scale, but if you enlarge the temporal scale, we live just a blip on that time scale. So by explaining away, you miss the opportunity to test different empirical hypotheses. So let's test and refute rather than ban the testing.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, I don't like either when some people say, like sympathizers of this field of the type of research I recount in Planta Sapiens in the book. So sometimes the sympathizers are far too keen on overinterpreting the data and say, yeah, sure, plants can learn, right? And I say, look, what's really important is what you said, just that we are able not to prejudge the issue either way, neither in favor nor against, but simply to be ready to raise the questions and to try to do the science that the way it needs to be done. So in principle, you might say, hey, why plants couldn't be in principle able to learn? They might be learning. They might be doing all sorts of things. In fact, that's my working hypothesis. But to do that, we need to be ready to first drop or stop thinking about ourselves as providing the gold standard.
Yeah, right.
Because it's far too easy to think, hey, plants cannot be doing any of these things you mentioned, because, to do them, they should resemble us somehow, because we do provide the set standard, the gold standard. We set the bar, right? Mm-hmm. And that's completely wrong. I mean, we need to be ready to realize that we are just one more species on planet Earth. So we got to be humble.
Okay. Well, I'll join it then with something else you said in that same snippet of conversation that I wrote down. You said the history of science is the study of the blow to the human pride.
Absolutely.
Or to the human ego.
Yeah. To me, if there is a lesson to me in Planta Sapiens, is, well, first, of course, you get to understand the scientific research on the efforts that are being made in trying to unearth plant intelligence, what it consists of, right? But to me, the second message of the book, which is way more important, is that by understanding plants or by understanding plant intelligence in its own terms, so once we have removed ourselves from the picture, we are not the gold standard anymore. Once you understand that, I would like to think we are able to rethink ourselves better, to rethink what human intelligence boils down to. So maybe by understanding plants, we realize that we were not that special in the first place. We are not unique.
So I didn't mean to read so much here in my question making, but these things that you say remind me of the things that I should read back to you, because that what you've just said reminds me of a passage that I read in your book actually just recently. So this is Planta Sapiens, right? It's funny because in the latter half of the book, this is probably 2 weeks ago, I just opened it up and it opened up to the chapter 5, and it's Do Plants Think?
Right.
And it was very interesting because you talked about art immediately. as you went straight to the Mona Lisa, and you explained how the Mona Lisa has attracted so many people all over the world and still does because it's very peculiar. And you said it's because, in part, we cannot quite determine what her expression is. And as you read through, these are great thoughts. This is that's why I found it so. Actually, this is not why. It hasn't surprised me why I found it potentially interesting to speak to you, because you wrote something like this, and you said because she could be anything, and I'm paraphrasing here. Her expression can represent so many things to so many people at any given time, because it depends on also the mood of the experience I'm watching.
Yeah, absolutely.
You said she poses a question to the viewer about themselves. Da Vinci's subtle virtuosity left the question carefully unanswered so that Sphinx-like, she might mystify all. The emotions she seems to be expressing are as varied as those experienced by her visitors. Going back to what you said, it's ego stripping because it leaves you just with questions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so dangerous. I mean, this is a clear example of how we negotiate our surroundings, how we navigate our surroundings has a lot to do with our expectations.
Right.
What is it that we expect forces us into a mold as to what is it that we see. And that's why it's so important to get rid of all those preconceptions. Because if you have certain expectations, such as there can be no intelligence without neural tissue or without a brain, then unless you jettison those expectations, there is no way you're going to be able to appreciate plant intelligence. I could show you time-lapse footage, the type of clips we film in the lab. And if you had those expectations, you would only be able to see the Mona Lisa in one way. So that's why you need to challenge those expectations. Otherwise, it's doomed. The project is doomed from the very beginning.
So what have you seen in the lab that would have us see the Mona Lisa in various ways or different ways?
Yeah. Well, just look, this morning we were setting up one experiment we are running now on actually, you mentioned at the beginning, crossing the pond, right?
Yeah.
In Spain, at the other side of the pond. Something similar we do with climbing beans. So we experiment with climbing beans jet lag, as in crossing the pond, right?
Yeah.
So think about it. If you flew over Europe, you crossed the pond this way, you brought your pet, your cat or your dog, I'm pretty sure you could be thinking, oh, my poor dog, my poor cat is got to be kind of, dazed and confused, like jet lag the way I am, because, it was meant to be dinner time and they're having breakfast. I mean, change the time zone so quickly. And then you're sort of, you need a few days to go back to normal, right? But I'm pretty sure, I bet that it could never cross your mind that if you were flying with a potted plant on your lap, you would think of your plant as being jet lagged.
Correct. Right? I would never think that. It never crossed my mind.
Well, but if you think about it, that's what we get to see in the lab, the other angles, the other Mona Lisas. Why? Because if you simply approach the issue from a plant physiology perspective, and this is why I told you in our lab we raise the questions that are not being raised in those quarters, they can tell you about circadian clocks, okay? They can tell you, yeah, sure, plants have their circadian clocks. In the case of climbing beans, we know, they fold their leaves, right? They fold their leaves, they do like this at night, no? When the sun sets, they fold their leaves, they unfold them in the morning. So we can follow that pattern. We can see their folding and unfolding, right? That's called nyctinastic, right, behavior. So the nyctinasty, you can appreciate it. We can time-lapse plants, we do that, and then we can see that. Then we can shift the photoperiod. We have light, artificial lighting in the growing chambers. We can shift the photoperiod and induce a form of jet lag to the plants, right? So the sun is expected to set at a certain time, and then there is a delay. It doesn't set until, 4 hours later. Right? So you can play with that. Now, if we have these expectations that only animals can be jet lagged, but not plants, you are not going to see anything, because you will simply see, oh, plants are folding their leaves, unfolding, that's it. But you don't get to see it, right? Now, usually, to me, the problem is the following. we usually think of what makes us special, right? We spoke as human, Homo sapiens. And then we might think, even if you have a generous attitude and say, okay, not just Homo sapiens, not just humans, but, fellow mammals, because we all have a neocortex, fellow mammals. Some people say, oh, of course, and why not birds? Oh, yeah, sure, birds. We know birds do amazing things. Now, many people are saying, hey, how about invertebrates or cephalopods? My octopus teacher, all that sort of thing, right? So we keep opening up, enlarging the picture, and say, okay, more guys are welcome to join the
the club.
Yeah.
Sorry, did you say cognitive club? You were about to say?
Yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah, we can issue some membership card, right?
Like Costco.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? In the end, you know what we are doing? We are allowing them in simply because we see that we share something. In this case, for example, with mammals, we share the neocortex.
Sure.
Or with birds and cephalopods, we share having neurons that fire, right? And since plants have no neurons or no neural tissue or no brains, we say, no, but they cannot possibly be. So there is no point in raising these questions or trying to do this research, right? And the critical point here is that what counts is not what's inside the head. It's not what we share with fellow primates, mammals. It's not what we share within the skull, so intracranially. What counts, what matters, is where we live, what world we inhabit. And we all happen to inhabit the same planet Earth, which means the sun rises and the sun sets for all forms of life. And that's why it would be crazy to think that if you are not an animal with neural tissue, you are not going to be jet-lagged, or you cannot possibly be jet-lagged, because to plants, the sun setting and rising also means good or bad news if there is a change in that pattern, right? So the fact that we've been exposed to the same type of regularities in, temperature, relative humidity, light conditions, that's been revolving in evolutionary time. And what form of life could afford not to pay attention to those regularities?
What counts is not what's inside the head, but what the head is inside of.
Absolutely.
Your words.
Absolutely. That's a motto of ecological psychology. So ecological psychologists were the first ones to not the first ones, but the ones that in the 20th century, they made this slogan to say, hey, pay attention to what's happening outside, because it's about the interacting, it's about what's going on out there, and not simply what's happening within the skull.
So do plants think?
Oh, to me, it's clear case. Now, with a caveat.
Yeah.
Of course, we need to rephrase and rethink what we mean by thought. It could be stupid to think that plants think, as in they can engage in conversations with us because they need to have a language that we need to be able to communicate. So the easiest way to think about plant thought is to put yourself out of the picture. So let's travel back in time. Okay, let's travel back in time a few million years ago. So let's go back in time, evolutionary time, to when there still were no humans roaming the earth.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine you're a foreign and a Martian scientist landing on planet Earth, back in time, no humans, that can provide the gold standard. So we are not here to provide the gold standard. We don't exist yet. We haven't evolved.
There's no gold standard because we're not here. What you're saying.
That's it. Well, that's a challenge. That's an intellectual challenge. How do you come to terms with these organisms, green organisms, being sessile? So they don't walk around, they don't move apparently. They are sitting still, they are rooted, anchored to the soil. And how can you come to terms or study the very possibility that they are engaging in deep inner thoughts, minding their own business, making sense of their surroundings, without using language or our, cognitive abilities as the benchmark, right? So that's the real target, the real challenge. And if you think about it, then things are less awkward, less weird. Because now you see, yeah, sure, plants can think. Well, that simply means, can plants behave, flexibly, anticipatorily? Can they reach their targets? Can they, not just in a pre-programmed fashion? So it's not that what comes in their genes. This is not about pre-programmed routines Otherwise, they wouldn't be intelligent. They would be simply having, they have good genes, right? As a result of evolution. We are talking about what they can go through in their lives. So what sort of experiences are contributing to them changing gear, doing this and not that, behaving flexibly, anticipating. So if one of the things that going back to thought as not linguistic thought, as not human thought, one of the things that is clear that pays off is to be able to predict the future, to anticipate states of affairs, right? So you don't want to simply respond to what's happening because it might be too late when the predator comes. You need to think ahead of time to anticipate when things could go wrong, right? So if I'm this Martian scientist landing on planet Earth, I might think, oh, hold on a sec. If plants are so slow, because in their case, growing takes time, so they reach their targets, but through growth, it takes a long time, an awful lot of time, right? So if they are so slow, it will pay off to them even more to be able to anticipate the future. Because if you are growing in the wrong direction, by the time you get there and realize you were growing in the wrong direction, it might be too late. So you better have the anticipatory mechanisms to make sure you are growing in the right direction. You don't want to get to the train station to realize that you were at the wrong station and you should have gone to the south station to catch your train.
Yes, right.
It's going to be too late. You're going to miss it. You want to make sure ahead of time that you are anticipating correctly the future, right? Predicting the future. So that's plant thought to the best. It's simply not like human thought.
You used a few minutes ago, you said anchored to the soil. Let's just assume I'm a plant. I don't see myself anchored in the soil. Maybe I see myself as soil dwelling and just my offshoots happen to be outside the earth. But
absolutely. I see what you mean. Well, there are two senses. That's a great question. There are two senses in which we need to rethink all this. One is, of course, that we give too much importance to what's happening above ground.
Yeah.
And below ground, we simply take it as, the roots, like, for anchoring purposes, as if it was not that important or that relevant. And we pay attention to the flowers, to the smell, to the, to the things that, but from the plant's perspective, below ground is where things are going on. I mean, it's where things are happening.
Yeah.
I mean, nutrients, water resources, growing my roots in this direction. So it's completely the opposite. That's for sure. Darwin was able to see that a long time ago.
Yeah, like they're I know I'm not saying anything new here, but it just occurred to me, like they are a subterranean species that just happen to, quote unquote, or maybe not quote unquote, protect us and provide us with things while living subterraneanly and existing subterraneanly. Like a tree is just as large in terms of dimensions or maybe space under the earth than it is above the earth.
Well, sure. I mean, that's what we need to realize, that when you see a tree, you need to double the size. You need to think, okay, this same thing we see above ground is the same below ground. Mm-hmm. And with all the connections, think of the mycorrhizal networks. I mean, the connections in between the roots of trees and fungi, right? Mm-hmm. The mycelial networks of fungi. Think of fungi, in fact, not plants, but fungi. They do their lives below ground and they only pop up for sexual purposes, for reproduction. So, spread. Mm-hmm. Plenty of things are going below ground. Some plant species, by the way, we know many that are not able to do photosynthesis. They don't have chloroplasts, so they cannot make food stuff with sunlight, right? Some of them. And they need to suck up the sugars and the nutrients from host organisms below ground and above ground. So their bags of tricks can vary wildly. And that's another issue, because sometimes, look, the fact that we don't truly think about plant intelligence, to me, is nicely reflected in the fact that we put them all in the same basket. As, for example, you ask, hey, are plants intelligent or can plants think? we would never raise this question for animals. We couldn't say, hey, are animals intelligent? We say, which ones? Who are you talking about?
Yeah.
An
you think
earthworm?
Dogs, dolphins, cats. Yeah.
But the fact that in plants, we keep them as an abstract category, all in the same basket, despite having thousands of species, plant species, doing their own very different things in very awkwardly different ways. It's a clear reflection that we are not there yet. But we need to think, hey, hold on a sec, which plant are you talking about? Because this plant might be more stupid than this other one. And in fact, many plants that rely on different, climbing plants, vines. They do incredible things that have nothing to do with what carnivorous plants do. And carnivorous plants, by the same token, they do their things differently. So we all have our different problems, and different problems means reaching different solutions. So we find different solutions to deal with different sets of contingencies.
Sure.
We need to be thinking of the individual, of this guy right here. What is this guy doing in this context? Not because it belongs to this category.
What about emotions? Can plants feel emotions? Can they be emotional? Can they show empathy? I guess those are two separate questions.
Yeah. The second one is a little bit more a red herring. The first one is easier to tackle. Not easy, but at least easier. In the following sense. Certainly, for example, we know that, they can be subject to stress. I mean, hydric stress or light stress or any form of stress, salt stress. So we can, provide many different experimental conditions in which we can measure and see stress in plants, right? Now, you are asking something else, not just stress, but sentience.
Yes.
Right? And we are talking about subjective awareness. Are plants aware of their surroundings? Can they feel, positive or negative about their interaction with their fellow plants or other organisms? Can they feel good or bad about it, right? Now, when it comes to sentience, it's helpful to rethink what is it that we do in the case of animal studies. Because when I'm studying the subjective awareness of a cow, a dog, a pet, a lizard, an invertebrate, a honeybee, or a fruit fly, I cannot perceive their sentience or their emotional states directly. I mean, I can not even yours. I mean, I can see your face, and out of your gesture, I can infer whether you are feeling angry or sad or happy or whatever. So those states are something you can never perceive directly. Only yours. I can experience mine, but any other fellow human or non-human organism is something I can only guess, right? So what do we do to guess if some non-human animal is sentient, has subjective awareness? Well, we rely on indirect markers or signatures. So one signature, for example, is analgesia, or being able to get pain down with drugs, or put them under anesthesia, right? So if I can anesthetize my pet when I take it to the vet, well, it's a fair question to ask, hey, when your pet, your dog or your cat comes out of anesthesia, what is it that is regaining, right? It's when it's going back to normal after having been anesthetized, you say, hey, my pet is back to normal. My dog recognizes me again, wags the tail. So, okay, he's back to normal. So what does it mean to go back to normal, to regain something? It means that you had lost something temporarily when submitted to anesthetics, right? Now, the fact that you are regaining that something, it can only mean that you are regaining that sense of awareness. Oh, I'm back to normal. I'm again aware of my surroundings. Now, if you recall the very beginning of Planta Sapiens, this is not a spoiler to readers because it's just the very first page. Remember the introduction? I start the book with the example of a plant under anesthesia and with the same anesthetic that we use for animals. So the very same anesthetic that you use in the vet, we put it under a glass bell with a plant, and when the plant was absorbing the molecules anesthetic through their leaves, eventually, after a while, they are anesthetized. And we know because we can put some electrodes and register the electrical activity, and the plant goes boom. And
Amazing.
we know that with a carnivorous plant, think of the Venus flytrap, right?
Uh-huh.
So for listeners, if they know the Venus flytrap, you know that you just trigger the inner hair. And if you trigger the inner hair twice, it will shut, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you anesthetize the Venus flytrap and you trigger it twice, it won't snapshot. It's being anesthetized. It won't respond. And if you record electrical activity, you'll see that it goes flat, like zzz. So there is no firing, no action potential. Like the neuronal action potential, by the way, is the same firing state, right? So the question is legitimate. I'm not claiming that I have the answer. I'm claiming that it is not unfair to raise the same question by analogy and ask, hey, what does it mean for the plant to come out of anesthesia? When the plant comes out of anesthesia and then I go back to triggering the inner hair, and now, yes, the Venus flytrap snapshots again, what is it that it has regained? I'm not saying we are forced to respond in the same way, but we shouldn't a priori deny the possibility of raising the very question as we did with fruit flies or honeybees or cephalopods, birds or mammals. What is it that they regain? My working hypothesis is that they are regaining that inner state of mind. Theirs, not yours. So we don't need to anthropomorphize plants. You don't need to think of the plant like, because one of the problems we have with this human gold standard we talk about is that we can't help but to think that, hey, somebody's got to be sitting at the wheel. Who is sitting at the wheel in the case of the plant? Who is doing the driving? That's the mistake, that to think that there is some little Paco like in my head. Because if you think about it, if we rethink human mind, there is not a little Paco here either.
Let me go back a few minutes ago as well when you started to answer the question, and you were referring to facial features and behaviors to infer maybe what I was feeling, but really only a guess.
Yeah.
But I mean, when you do, we've talked about this before on the podcast. The listeners will know when you walk into a room, most people would find it easy to feel the mood of the room. And you can infer that there is somebody has just spoken about you in the room, that there are people who are not benevolent towards you, that people are happy to see you, that people are indifferent. Like there is a feeling.
There is something in the air. Something in the air.
Yeah. And it's not about guessing. It's about feeling that. No, there's a knowing in the feeling of that. Maybe that's, I guess, the third question to you is that something that plants can do? Are they capable of this?
Okay, so just again, let's play the same game of thinking by analogy.
Sure.
What sort of parameters can we think of? So when you say, because this is science, right? So when you say there is something in the air, there is a tension, there is something, as you said, in the case of a human fellow walking into a room and feeling something funny about whatever.
Yeah.
It always must boil down to something that we can measure and some physical parameter that we can rely on. Say electromagnetic fields, say chemical information, some chemical gradient. There was some gradient in the air that you can feel if somebody chopped some celery or carrots recently, or chocolate chip, whatever. Something is there. Or if people were speaking loud and then all of a sudden they shut up, you're going to feel the silence because there are no more vibrations, right?
Sure.
This, you see, what I'm trying to say is that if we go to the physical parameters themselves, the same thing holds. Plants feel electromagnetic fields. Plants certainly monitor and, are sensitive to an incredible amount of chemicals, volatile organic compounds, we call them. So it's all sorts of information in the air. They are emitting and receiving all these chemical signals, and they do actually use it proactively. So, for example, say there is a plant that is being, managed by a caterpillar.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the plant is going to emit this chemical that is going to attract the natural predator of the caterpillar to eat it off.
Amazing.
Right? You get rid of it. Sometimes you have plants. We have a student doing a PhD thesis here on phytoacoustics. So plants are able to sense those vibrations, as we spoke about the vibrations of, in the room. So plants will be able, sometimes you have a flower, there is a buzzing pollinator. Imagine the pollinator approaching the flower. They can tell if the frequency, the vibration of this pollinator buzzing corresponds to the one that pollinates her. So if this flower identifies the pollinator by the vibrational pattern, is going to increase the nectar, the concentration of nectar, to attract him and have more chances of reproduction. If the vibrations correspond to some other species or some other source of that is not pollinator related, it's not going to increase the nectar. So you see, if we speak of the parameters, things look less mystical, I would say. It's like you can track it down, you can make the measurements, you can do the science and say, oh, we know what's happening here. Of course, the plant is aware of what's happening in the surroundings. For example, take ratios of light, different parts of the spectrum. So if there is more people in the vicinity, more plants, more fellow plants in the vicinity, they are going to be absorbing more red, right? Because the plants are going to be absorbing the red and the blue, right? And not the far red, and they are reflecting the green. That's why you see them green. So if I have a lot of plants competing for sunlight in the vicinity, they will be absorbing red, but they won't be absorbing far red light that much, right? So the ratio, the proportion of red to far red light, or the ratio of blue to green light, is highly informative to plants. So they can walk into the room, as you said, and figure out how much competency there is in the neighborhood. Hey, all these guys are around here doing photosynthesis. I better grow in the opposite direction to find my, little window up there and grow up into full blue sky and do photosynthesis. So shade avoidance tropism. They will grow away from shade. But sometimes they need to grow towards shade. So, for example, take a vine that needs to find a host tree to twine around. So at the beginning, these tropical plants will perform what is called a scototropic behavior. So rather than phototropic, this means growing towards darkness and not towards light. So first they will sense darkness. Oh, there is less light here. And that triggers the tropic response. So they will grow towards there because that's the stump of the tree. Once they reach the tree, they shift towards phototropic behavior. So, okay, I got hold of the host tree. Now I want to grow into full sunshine. You see? So they will be picking on many different types of information depending on what they need at each moment.
Are you coming up against heterodoxy at all? Are there people who are not happy with what you're studying or how you're studying it?
You couldn't imagine how much people. Yeah. Well, to tell you the truth, to be fair, I have both. So I think I wouldn't. Of course, I wouldn't be able to quantify that, but if this is a non-scientific study, I would say that in my inbox, I receive a fair amount of skeptical emails from orthodox skeptics and a fair amount of positive emails from sympathizers. Now, so mainstream plant physiology hasn't got it quite yet, because what they don't get, going back to your original question about doing philosophy of cognitive science, what they don't get is that we are not doing plant physiology. So they think that plant physiology explains it all, right? And say, no, we are not doing the physiology. I'm not trying to find out, the nuts and bolts of respiration or photosynthesis. We have the biologists doing that. We are doing something else, which is plant cognitive science. So what does it mean for a non-neural organism such as a plant to make decisions, to learn? Can plants learn? That's a legitimate question, right? Now, what worries me is not the position of these skeptics, because they simply do the physiology and they simply haven't understood that we are into a different project. It's not incompatible. You can keep doing the physiology. We are doing something else. It should be compatible.
I see it as a layer building on top.
Right. That's it. And that's what they don't see. They see it as a competent, as a competing alternative approach, which is not. It's what you said, just a layer on top. Now, what worries me far more is the attitude of some sympathizers who want to buy your message before you have explained to them why plants are intelligent or what the scientific evidence is. So it's not good either to believe it as dogma. You need to believe it not because you want to, but because you understand the science and understand that we have the evidence that points in that direction.
Well, okay. Just to play devil's advocate, maybe those sympathizers want to believe you because they feel the knowledge to be true.
Right.
I mean, feeling is not. We shouldn't poo-poo feeling either.
Yeah.
Like that person walking in the room, right?
Sure. Oh no, absolutely. So we are all biased. I mean, there is no. I mean, this cartoon understanding this toy version of science as the objective, ultimate scientific. Of course, science is done by humans.
Yeah.
And that means like any other activity in life. So science is done by humans with our miseries, our virtues, and the way we are. So real science and not objective toy science. The real science in the flesh, is science that has to do with emotions, and we don't want to get rid of those, because the fact that we are emotional beings allows us to envisage working hypotheses that we might not be thinking of otherwise. So thinking of alternative hypotheses is what we need to be doing, quite regardless of how you get to think of them, to envisage them. So Einstein used to say, hey, I came up with this idea, as colors in a dream. So I don't care how you got the idea. The different issue is how you test it.
Yeah, okay.
So all hypotheses, however heterodox they are, should be on the table. Let's consider them all.
Well,
but we shouldn't bang any hypothesis because a priori it sounds awkward. No, let's buy them all in the sense of let's consider them all and let's test them all.
Yeah, very cool. Because you said don't ban the testing. So is there testing that you're doing or people in your field doing that others are trying to ban?
Oh yeah, well, absolutely. Look, the research we do. So think how serious the situation is. That I have got I can say this because it has been published, it's in print. But the main figures in plant physiology, and now I'm talking about the editor-in-chief of the journal Plant Physiology, the editor of the textbook Plant Physiology, the textbook like any undergrad student goes through in biology courses. So the big popes in the field, they published a paper in this journal a few years ago, explicitly asking funding agencies to stop funding our research.
Wow.
And academic journals to stop publishing our papers. They were asking them to do that, to say, hey, don't give these guys money because they are, they were explaining why we shouldn't be funded. You know what they were saying? They were saying because they are wasting or ruining, I'm paraphrasing, the frame of mind of a generation of researchers, young researchers. So they don't want young researchers to be exposed to heterodox hypothesis.
So what's the real fear?
I don't get it. I really don't get it, because one thing that I keep insisting on is that we shouldn't be signing a blank check either way. I don't know either if plants are able to do this or that, but what is the fear of testing it? Why shouldn't we test it?
Yeah.
And especially since, you know what happens in academia, surprise, surprise, it's a world of big egos. And you have, all these full professors with their ego huge. They can't even walk in the room. They need to make a bigger door. No, it's true. It's amazing. I just don't get that, because it's as if we couldn't work simultaneously in parallel on alternative frameworks. As if by the fact that you are raising this question, you couldn't raise in parallel many other questions.
Sure.
We don't need to do that and only that. Why don't we do everything at the same time? I mean, 1,000 flowers bloom, right? Yeah, it's something I still don't get. But all I can say is that there is a strong reaction by these academic figures. Most of them, I must say, retired, like emeritus professors. I don't know. Take it easy. I mean, wait.
Well, for me, again, I don't have scientific background, but you're asking, and this is again one of the reasons why we wanted you on the show. You're asking the what if, but you're not tied to the what if. You're just asking it.
Absolutely.
And you're measuring it, and you're creating an argument for asking. I think this is my interpretation. You're creating the argument for asking the question, and then more questions.
Yeah, definitely. To me, science is not about providing answers. It's about one question taking you to the next, as you said. That's absolutely the case. To me, that's the real science. It's so funny when you think of the way academics prepare applications for funding agencies, right? Okay, I'm going to work on this project. And then in this application, they have to explain what they're going to be doing. And look, this is what they do. This is what we are forced to do in academia. They say, okay, you have to tell us what you're going to accomplish in the first year. And then what will be the research question of the second year? And what will you get by the time you get to the equator of the project? And then, so you need to be giving on a yearly basis, progress reports in which you have foreseen ahead of time what the results are going to be in the context of the previous round of results. And then I think, excuse me, that cannot possibly be research. Because research means that I haven't got the slightest idea of what the answer is going to be.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so put it this way. If I knew the answer right today, I don't need the project.
Yeah.
I don't need to do the research. I can just publish it because I know the answer. The fact that I need the project, I need the money, the funding, is because I don't know the answer.
That seems obvious. I don't know the answer,
well, it's not in academia.
Then we are rewarding the wrong things.
We are rewarding
the wrong behavior.
We are rewarding orthodox safety nets in which you do, little steps, one step at a time, very modest, very little, because you don't want to risk. Because you need to make sure you have your publications under your belt every year, and we did this, and we did that, and we did that. And then you say, but didn't you expect that to be the case 3-4 years ago? So what is the progress? What have you learned? You have learned nothing other than being able to justify to the funding agency what you did. But other than that, that's boring science.
I'm putting on my business hat very, very briefly here. How much does this have to do with the selling of textbooks?
Yeah, well, that's a big business. I say that's a big topic. Look, I have a PhD student, doing his thesis on fast science. Fast science as in fast food, fast tourism, fast science.
Right.
And that's the name of the game nowadays. Publications, it has become such a huge business. You have these 2 publishing groups, and they have all these thousands of journals. Look, I always think of a imagine like this sort of a surrealist game. Because you think of these thousands of journals that they need to publish their articles in their journals on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, or every 3 months, whatever. But they need to go out there in print. So can you imagine science fiction? Imagine one day in which all of a sudden there is not any result to be reported because for some reason there is a delay. So imagine there was not a result to be published. What would happen? Would journals publish their pages in blank? No, that's impossible, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that journals need to publish to keep the business ball rolling means that something has to go in print, even though nothing is worth being reported.
Yeah. Yeah, that also rewards being a part of a club. If you can do that, if you can help publish that, you're part of this club that can provide the answers to the world.
Sadly, there was a joke among PhD students that is like, for tenure, going on tenure track, getting a position. It's like publish or perish, right? Publish or perish culture. So either you publish or you perish. Now it's even worse because they say publish, then perish.
Yeah, it's a great grinding machine.
Absolutely.
Seeing that your science and your curiosity has you keep asking the questions, not being convinced on an answer, but finding a question after a question. Are there or is there an answer that you would wish to have before you die?
Oh, wow. I know the answer. And yes, I'm obsessed with two topics. Okay. So one is learning. And you know why? Because learning, remember these signatures I told you about sentience in animal literature? Like we talk about anesthesia, but we didn't speak of learning. So learning, enhanced forms of learning, not basic habituation or some basic primitive learning, but sophisticated forms of learning are taken to be like one of the markers or the signatures of subjective awareness. So if this animal is able to exhibit this form of learning, then we thereby infer that is sentient to some extent, right? So one of the forms of learning that has been proposed as this marker is trace conditioning. So trace conditioning is a form of learning, like classical conditioning, like the Pavlov's dog. Like, the Pavlov's dog, when you have the bell and then comes the food and then the bell and then the food. And by the end, when the Bob picks it, connects the dots. Oh, yeah, I know bell means, so just by hearing the bell, it starts to salivate for, in anticipation to the future food, right? So when there is no overlap in the presentation of the stimuli, so you present one stimulus and then there is a temporal gap and then you present the second stimulus, that's called a trace. That's why it's called trace conditioning. So trace conditioning is an enhanced form of learning because you cannot hold the stimulus. It just leaves a trace in your memory. And then by resorting to that trace, you connect the dots. Oh, that thing that happened means this. I connect the dots, thereby I anticipate.
Okay.
Right? So one of the things I would like to see before I die, especially if I don't die tomorrow, I need some more time.
No, you need time. We need time.
Yeah, is trace conditioning in plants. Now we have a project researching on this. It's only a 2 years project. And I know that in 2 years, I cannot make big breakthroughs, but that's what you said. I hope to get to the stage in which I have a better question to keep pushing, right? But trace conditioning to me is a great place to get started. Mainly because we already know that trace conditioning is being done by fruit flies and honeybees. So you don't need a neocortex. You don't need to be a vertebrate. You don't need to be a mammal. So, if we found that would be, interesting to rethink the type of markers for sentience across species beyond the animal kingdom.
I guess I shouldn't be surprised by your answer to my question. That's a wonderfully profound desire for an answer. But you said two things. What's the second thing?
Yeah, the second one, I'm increasingly concerned about lab research. Like, what we do at the moment, which is like, we have a controlled growing chamber, we provide the conditions, we can control relative humidity, temperature, lighting, CO2, whatever. And then we do these experiments. But we need to go in the wild. Remember when I said what counts is not what's inside the head, but what the head is inside of. The growing chamber is a bad place to be at. So we need to go back to the wild. We need to be doing plant ethology, the equivalent to animal ethology, right? To study the behavior of plants in the open, in the wild, out there, what they are up to. And to me, so that together with something else, which is non-domesticated species, endemic wild species. So my dream, and this is a big dream because this is a problem, funding. My dream is to be able, for example, say, go in Costa Rica or some other forests, template forests, we have vines that are endemic and in risk of extinction that have not been domesticated. And I insist of not being domesticated and being in the open, because by doing research on plant intelligence on domesticated species, we forget that a chihuahua is very different from a wolf.
Mm-hmm.
So dogs, our pets have become spoiled dogs.
Yes.
So we yeah.
Sorry.
So that's the problem with domesticated plants. That take a vine, a climbing plant. If we provide the pole, generation after generation, the plant doesn't need to search for a support.
Maybe by sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that my second dream is to scout for plant intelligence in the wild to the naked eye, not through time-lapse footage, because that's what Darwin was able to do. You know why? Because with time-lapse, we speed plants up. We accelerate their behavior to appreciate it. But what worries me is that a century and a half ago, Darwin, to the naked eye, was able to see way beyond what we see nowadays with the best equipment. So it's not about technology. It's not about equipment. It's about the right frame of mind. So let's walk in the wild with the right frame of mind, because we might be missing all this intelligence that is out there. We simply miss it because we are not in the right frame of mind.
You know, maybe what has spoiled us is the invention of language. It's made us lazy.
You know what is the song that moved me into philosophy when I was a teenager? Actually, by a Canadian singer. It was Language is a Virus.
Huh. No, who sang that?
I forgot her name, but if you Google it up, Language is a Virus, it's from the 80s. It's a classic from the 80s. I remember I was 17, 18, because I started going to school to study engineering, telecommunications engineering, and then quit it and enrolled in philosophy. So I'm then into plants. So that was a big move.
You disappointed parents for sure.
Absolutely. Now in retrospect, now 3 decades later, they say, "Okay, Paco, that's okay. Now
it's okay. Now it's okay. We forgive you." Yeah.
But it took them 3 decades to realize. But I was obsessed with language. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because language. So it's so, going back to this orthodoxy, the skeptical attitude, the guys asking agencies not to fund our work.
Crazy.
It's because they are obsessed with language. If you say plants make decisions or plants have awareness, they go nuts about what they mean by decision making. Decision. And that's because they have this inflated understanding of decision making as this guy driving the wheel in my head. I'm going to turn left. And I said, hold on a second. You don't understand it. That's why I said it's so important to rethink human intelligence, because it's contaminated by thinking in language. Is language one of the big issues here? I wish we didn't think in language. It's the format of language that ruins it all.
Maybe
Absolutely.
we need another part here just to talk about language, because that's so good. It's so good. Your second goal there, not to take away from your first goal at all, just because as soon as you said you would like to, in describing what your second goal was, your second wish, going out into the wild, that's just, like, in general, that's just something we don't do anymore.
Yeah.
For us, our wild is a curated park that we maybe do if we have a few minutes, a couple of Sundays a year.
Yeah. We need to find out what plants are up to in their own context when we are not around.
Yeah, maybe that's the gold standard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to try to be that Martian scientist landing on planet Earth a few million years ago.
Yeah. Nice. We got to be like the Martians. Again. Very cool. Okay, last question, Paco. What is greatness to you?
What is greatness?
Yeah.
Oh, you left the most difficult question for the end.
Is it?
I don't know, because actually, I've been giving this quite a lot of thinking lately because, remember what you mentioned about the timescales?
Mm-hmm.
That depending on which timescale we are looking at, then we see things differently. And when you think about nested timescales, I have this feeling of vertigo, both directions. As I go inwards, think of Russian dolls, okay? Think of Russian dolls as in going inwards, again, Paco's mind, then tissues, then molecules, then atoms, then subatomic particles. So if you go inwards in that scale, then you feel this vertigo of, who is at the wheel at those levels, right? But lately, I've been more concerned about the other direction, in which you and I, have become the organelles, the intracellular organelles of a bigger organism. So, for example, when we speak of Gaia, and we speak, is there a system in the biosphere that we could consider the organism as such? I think, oh my God, I'm thinking more and more seriously all the time about myself as just one organelle belonging to this huge cell, which is Gaia. And greatness, to me, is the same thing when applied to the universe as a whole, because planet Gaia is one organelle of that one and only system, which is the universe. So if you think of demarcation lines, when we put border lines, frontiers, we set frontiers to come to terms with aspects of reality. And then we need to parcel reality and say, hey, I'm going to parcel reality, and I put a borderline here in between Paco and Luciano. And then, okay, this is one individual of the species Homo sapiens, and this is another individual. And then when we erase that border, we realize that we are both swimming within Gaia. But there is one and only organism, if you think about it, which is the universe as a whole. That's the one and only instance that defies any other borderline, any other demarcation. So that's, to me, the real vertigo, if greatness can be related to that.
That is the most complex answer I've ever heard to that question. That's absolutely what you are. I don't regret a moment about our decision in bringing you on and inviting you. You are obviously a scientist, and excuse me, so obviously a philosopher.
I can't help it.
No, that's good. And help it along. Never mind.
Yeah,
Paco, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Really enjoyed it. It was great. Thank you.